You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lehmiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. For as long as people have been having relationships, they've been committing infidelity. But the nature of cheating is something that has changed a lot over time. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. We're going to explore cheating in the digital age. New research finds that technology is forcing many people to redraw their lines. To that end, we're going to discuss what people today think counts as cheating, including how many people think that watching porn or fantasizing about someone else is a form of infidelity. We'll also discuss how many people have ever suspected a partner of being unfaithful and what they did in those situations. From checking devices, to using location tracking tools, to, yes, even hidden cameras, some people have gone to great lengths to try and prove that their partner has been cheating. What this new research tells us is that the modern cheating landscape isn't just about physical betrayal anymore. It's emotional, it's digital, and sometimes it doesn't even have to involve another human at all. And modern technology is making it harder and harder to keep infidelity a secret. I am joined once again by Dr. Amanda Gesselman, a research scientist and head of the Vibes research team at the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University. Digital intimacy is a major focus of her research, including how people use tools like campsites, AI companions, dating apps, and social media to navigate connection and desire. This is going to be another fascinating conversation that you won't want to miss. Stick around, and we're going to jump in right after the break. Do you ever find yourself dreaming about a career where you get to talk about sex and psychology all day long? What if I told you there's a place that can connect you with world-class experts and has a large, thriving community? Sexual Health Alliance does just that. Sexual Health Alliance helps you to build the career of your dreams and is at the forefront of sexuality education. Students come from all parts of the world and from all types of backgrounds. Whether you're in school just starting out on your journey or building advanced skills in your profession, Sexual Health Alliance's comprehensive certifications, engaging events, and self-paced online education will move you beyond the basics and set you up to become sexceptional. Visit sexualhealthalliance.com and start building the sexuality career of your dreams today. And let them know that you heard about Sexual Health Alliance on this podcast. Okay, Amanda, let's talk about infidelity in the digital age. So we're going to be diving further into a demographically representative survey of 2,000 single American adults we conducted at the Kinsey Institute in partnership with datingadvice.com, in which we were looking at the state of modern sex, love, and intimacy. One of the key topics that we explored was infidelity. So let's get into it. So one of the things we asked about was how people define cheating. And one of the really interesting findings was that 1/3 of singles said that sexting or falling in love with an AI partner would represent infidelity. So let's start there, since AI is such a hot topic of discussion these days. Why do you think AI, something that isn't even human, triggers such a strong reaction for so many people?
I love this data. I think this is so interesting. I think that AI has become so prominent in our culture, so, easily accessible. It's in like every other media story. People are using it constantly for their work or their school. I think what has happened is that AI has become so prominent that even though we know it's not human and not real, we're all sort of slowly recognizing that even so, it can provide us with benefits that feel real. It can provide us with conversation or with ideas or, help us shape our decisions or our lives in some way. And I think people are slowly catching on to the idea that those benefits might be meaningful or authentic. And so people are sort of thinking like, whatever AI can provide for my partner, whatever kind of conversations they're having, those are meaningful and authentic enough to feel threatening. It's something that has just crossed the line into what another human could potentially provide them.
Yeah, so it's kind of this fear of being replaced to some extent.
Or not being unique anymore. So, if you and I are in a relationship, we have this sort of special language between us. I understand your needs and wants and vice versa, and I try my best to meet them. And now you have outsourced my job as a partner to this computer who is somehow meeting those needs where I used to.
Something we should ask about in a future survey is to have people sort of rate like what's worse when it comes to cheating. And would it be worse if your partner cheated on you with an AI bot versus an actual human being? Because I think there is a certain subset of people who would find it like even more insulting if their partner cheated on them with a bot than with an actual human, because it would get at this sort of deep insecurity that like their needs can be outsourced or fulfilled better by a robot, by a computer than by them as a person. I don't know. I think it'd be interesting to ask about.
Oh, I think that would be so interesting. Yeah, like I'm such a mediocre partner that you could get better from a string of ones and zeros. That's terrible.
Right. Yeah. I can see how some people would find that to be kind of like the ultimate like insult crossing the line. But anyway, we'll have to collect more data to know the answer. But what the results about this, in terms of AI and cheating tell us is that people clearly don't just view infidelity as a physical sexual act. It is much broader than that. So what does infidelity look like in the modern world? What were some of the other kinds of things that people were likely to count as cheating? We know the obvious of like, well, if you're having sex with somebody else and you're in a monogamous relationship, shouldn't be doing that. And for some people, being with an AI bot crosses the line, but what else is on the list?
Well, as you said, we obviously found those sort of expected behaviors. So the number one thing that people counted as cheating was their partner having in-person physical sex with another person. Also, things like kissing another person or even flirting with another person were considered cheating. But we also looked at a lot of digital behaviors. And interestingly, around 70% felt that sexting with another person counted as cheating, which was very close to the number of people who felt having in-person physical sex was cheating. Like they were only 2 percentage points off. So sexting has become this huge relationship behavior now where people are thinking, if my partner is sexting another person, that is definitely a betrayal. They've crossed the line. This is a cheating behavior. So we have sexting. We also found that a good number of people feel that interacting with performers on cam sites like OnlyFans or Chatterbait or My Free Cams, Live Jasmine, etc., that interacting with performers in that way would be cheating. Either just visiting them, talking to them, or sending them money was especially indicative of cheating. And then we also looked at porn. 20% of people thought that their partner watching porn would count as cheating, which actually is lower than in previous years. So that seems to be slowly declining.
Yeah. So lots and lots of different things are counted as cheating. And I pulled up some of the numbers here so that we could dive into a couple of other things that were there. And some that I thought were really interesting were that almost a third of people thought that fantasizing about someone else was cheating, right? So just having a thought of another person is for some people crossing a line.
Isn't that interesting in comparison with porn, though? Only 20% felt porn was cheating, but 31% felt fantasizing was cheating. But when you're watching porn, aren't you in some ways fantasizing about that person?
For a lot of people, they are. So yeah, it is interesting, especially when you start comparing these numbers. And you did bring up like a really interesting point that it's almost the same number of people who said that sexting with someone else is cheating compared to the number of people who said kissing someone else would be cheating. You might think that people would distinguish these things a bit more, but no, like sexual and emotional cheating are seen as pretty equivalent in the eyes of a lot of people. And that's why I think a lot of studies of infidelity are kind of fundamentally flawed, because they're like, would you be more upset by sexual infidelity or emotional infidelity? And it's like, you start looking at the results of these studies and it's like, people are pretty upset by both of them. And we also asked about things like financial infidelity, like financially supporting someone else or buying meals or gifts for someone else. A lot of people consider that to be cheating. So, cheating isn't just about the physical sex act. And it's also not just about developing an emotional bond with someone else or with a machine. It's also about how are you spending your money and other things like that. So yeah, cheating means a lot of different things in today's world. And I think the fact that infidelity means so many different things and people have different definitions of it, it's going to have a lot of implications for how we navigate our relationships. Like we can't just assume our partner is going to have the same understanding of infidelity as us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing we did find in our data set is that a lot of people think that you should only be dating one person at at any given time. And that's even though they don't usually have a discussion about this. So what that's saying is that a lot of people are having relationships with other people without having ever had any kind of clear discussion about where the boundaries are, what counts as cheating, what should be expected from you or from me in this relationship. And so, as we see more and more ways to connect digitally rising up or emerging, I think we're going to see a lot of people kind of in trouble, like struggling to navigate these relationships that they have with their partners, struggling to figure out where their boundaries lie and what they're allowed to do and what they're not to do. I think that we're going to have a sort of communication revolution, so to speak. I mean, looking at the relationship data over the past couple of decades, it's pretty clear that people often don't discuss these things. You look at dating apps and people almost never talk about what kind of relationship they're looking for. Once they start dating, they have a really hard time talking about where the boundaries of commitment lie. And that's not new. That's something that we've seen over time. And so I think that we're going to have to start forcing those conversations in order to save ourselves a little mental distress down the road, especially as there are just like more and more ways for people to potentially cross our lines.
Yeah. And so I can't help but therefore wonder, how do we set healthy boundaries in our relationships? And what are realistic expectations to have for our partners today? Like, is it realistic to expect that your partner is never going to watch porn over the course of your entire relationship, or that they're never going to fantasize about someone else? We also found that roughly a third of people said that if their partner shared a secret with someone else, that would count as cheating too. And it's like, if you start adding all of these things up, it's like a really big list of things that you're not allowed to do. And I think the odds that somebody's going to transgress one of those things is going to be pretty high. And so, I understand that some of these things might not feel good to certain people, but are they cheating, and are they realistic expectations for us to have for our partners? I don't know. I don't know if there are right or wrong answers to that. I don't want to judge what it is that makes people feel comfortable or uncomfortable in their relationships. But, at the very least, we need to talk about these things if this really is a red line for you.
Yeah, exactly. Neither of us are therapists, but, it's pretty clear that the thing that upsets people is that they want to feel important and valued and special in their relationships. There's something about being unique to another person. And so anything that your partner might do with you in a relationship that makes it feel solid and makes you feel like you're that special person to them, if they go and do that with another person, that's sort of breaking that illusion or that feeling for you. And that's when you can start to have these hurt feelings. So anything that you might do in support of your relationship might feel like a transgression if you do it with a different person. What I think causes a little bit of trouble is that people might go into these sort of discussions with this sort of set of rules that they want to lay out for their partner. I don't ever want you to watch porn, or I don't ever want you to fantasize about another person, without thinking about what it actually means for the other, not the rule, but like the behavior. So if my hard and fast rule is that I don't want you to ever watch porn, well, I'm not really thinking about what that means for you. Like maybe for you, watching porn is just, you might as well be watching a movie or a football or something on TV. Like it doesn't have any real substantial, long-lasting meaning for you. It's just something that you watch for entertainment. And in that case, is it really a threat to me in the way that I might have been thinking about it beforehand? Maybe not. But it does take a lot of patience and courage to talk about those things and to really get into the meat of what they mean to you.
Yeah, and a lot of self-exploration and vulnerability to be able to talk about and explore all of this. And like I said, there are no right or wrong answers to all of this, but at the very least, important conversations to have. When a relationship is in crisis, especially after infidelity, you don't just need therapy. You need someone who really understands the complicated intersection of betrayal, intimacy, and sexual disconnection, and who can guide you through it with clarity and expertise. That's exactly what Thread and Tether offers. Led by Jason Powell, a licensed marriage and family therapist and ASEX certified sex therapist who specializes in helping couples heal and reconnect. Jason's practice sits at the unique crossroads of infidelity repair, sex therapy, and relational intimacy. Instead of treating these as separate issues, he works with couples to understand how they intertwine, emotionally, psychologically, and sexually, so that you can rebuild something that actually lasts. And one of the things that sets Thread and Tether apart is Jason's dedication to in-person intensives in Boston. These aren't quick check-ins. They're immersive, structured sessions designed for couples in the immediate or lingering aftermath of betrayal, situations where weekly therapy sometimes isn't enough. Jason works with clients virtually in a number of states and also offers in-person work in both Boston and Manhattan by arrangement, so you can get specialized support no matter where you're starting from geographically or emotionally. If you and your partner are trying to heal, rebuild trust, or reestablish intimacy after a major rupture, Thread and Tether provides expert guidance with compassion and a clear plan for what comes next. Check the show notes for the link or learn more at threadandtether.com. So we also asked people whether they thought they'd ever been cheated on by a partner before, and we found that nearly half of singles had suspected a partner of cheating. And women reported suspicion at somewhat higher rates than men. It was about 54% of women and 43% of men who said that they had thought a partner had cheated on them before. Most people who suspected a partner of cheating said that they did something about it. And about a third of them immediately confronted their partner. But there was this other 40 to 42% who kind of did their detective work first. So what were some of the things that people did to try and determine whether their partner was actually cheating on them?
Well, the top ways that they gathered evidence were snooping through their partner's phone or snooping through their electronics in some way, and then also asking their friends if they've noticed anything weird. So there's a mix of, digital and in-person social support networks going on here, but snooping through the phone or snooping through the computer were far and away the number one ways that people were collecting that data before acting on it. And what we did find was that for people who suspected their partner of cheating, the great majority of them said that those suspicions were confirmed, regardless of if they gathered evidence or not.
Yeah, and we'll get into that in just a minute and talk about what does that mean. But some of the other ways that people reported for checking up on their partner included secretly following their partner when they left their home or work, right? So some people really went full detective mode and went undercover. It wasn't that common, but it was about 1 in 10 who did so. There were about 5% who said that they used some type of electronic surveillance, like they did it through location sharing on their phone, or they installed an AirTag on their partner's car or briefcase or purse or something like that. A small number, about 3%, said they actually installed hidden cameras inside of their home or voice recorders to try and catch their partner in the act. And then just a couple percent said that they actually went to the length and expense of hiring a private investigator to follow their partner and see if they cheated. So, it represents a wide range of behaviors. Most people are doing what is easiest and simplest, which is just kind of checking their partner's devices, because oftentimes partners have access to them. But, some people are clearly, like we said, going full detective mode here. But I think this all raises the question of kind of where do you draw the line and what is and is not appropriate to do when you suspect your partner of cheating? Do you have any thoughts? What is a reasonable approach here and what maybe crosses the line a little bit into paranoia or, really severe violation of privacy?
Yeah, that data made me wonder. So if you thought your partner was cheating on you and you did all of these things, you installed AirTags in their car and followed them around and hired a private investigator, what would you do if it turned out they weren't cheating, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've done all of these things that certainly cross a lot of people's lines, I would say. And now you've determined that actually nothing was going on. If you had to tell your partner all the things that you've done, would you be ashamed of that behavior? If so, maybe that's not something you should be doing. Maybe we should have a conversation instead, or, work with a therapist or what have you. I just wonder, for that small amount of people whose suspicions were dashed, what happened? Did the relationship end because they violated their partner's privacy so badly? If someone was following me around, I think I would have to end that relationship. So that's something that I think about for those people. Hopefully it worked out, but they are single, so I don't think it did.
Yeah, I kind of got to wonder, in those cases where somebody is convinced that their partner is cheating and they go to these great lengths and they're not finding evidence, I think some people still remain convinced that something is off and they're going to look for and find something that they can hold against their partner or use as some sort of confirmation of their suspicions. And so, in extreme cases, there is some paranoia here that is like really unhealthy, that just puts them onto this hunt to find something, anything, no matter what it is. But yeah, I think that's the minority of cases. But I think ideally, if you suspected your partner of cheating, you would have a conversation about this, right? To sort of clear the air and see what's going on before you start taking these steps of invading their privacy and snooping through their phones and all these other things, because that can create other deeper problems in the relationship. Because then you're taking one potential trust violation and you're adding another trust violation on top of that by invading their privacy. And so then it becomes sort of this two-way thing of betrayal and how do you resolve and deal with that. And I also realize that if you suspect your partner of cheating and you confront them about it, sometimes they're not going to be honest, right? And so you still kind of have to do some kind of detective work. But what is reasonable and also legal to do, like installing these tracking devices on your partner's stuff and keystroke trackers on their devices, like you start to wade into some risky territory there. So I would urge caution with some of those more intensive forms of partner surveillance.
Yes, absolutely. Once you start, buying things off the black market, I think that's a sign that you've gone a bit too far. That also reminds me that in our data set, we asked people what the most valuable trait is in a partner. What are they looking for? What's the number one thing? We had like a whole list of things that they could choose. And across the board, the number one thing was honesty, like outranked physical attractiveness and a sense of humor and everything else on the list. That's really interesting in this kind of situation because, yes, the person doing the detective work wants an honest partner. They want to know the truth. They want to know their partner's not cheating on them. But on the flip side, the other person who potentially is not cheating also wants an honest partner, right? And so they don't want a partner who is going through all of their things and then lying to them about it. So I think there has to be some consideration for that, some mutual respect. And as hard as it is, having some sort of conversation, even if you're not openly saying, are you cheating on me? Just ask what's going on. Why do you have to work late so many times this week? Like, is there something going on in our relationship? I think that's important to ask. I also think we did ask people if they have been cheated on, as we've been talking about, but we also asked them if they've cheated on others. And the discrepancy between the two numbers is vast. So to me, that says a lot of those suspicions maybe weren't true. Maybe the person really wasn't cheating.
Yeah. Now, when it came to this point of, what happened when they did their detective work? Were their suspicions confirmed? We found that a striking 81% of people said that they were right. So if they suspected their partner of cheating 4 out of 5 times, they were like, yep, they were actually cheating. So were you surprised the number was that high? And do you think that number is so high because we just have more tools at our disposal now to kind of see what our partners are getting up to? I mean, I think it's probably a lot easier to detect infidelity now than it was in the past because there are so more digital trails that can potentially and oftentimes inadvertently reveal it. Like, for example, a credit card purchase that you don't recognize. There's so many ways that infidelity can just kind of pop up that just wouldn't have happened in the past.
Oh, yeah. I was surprised that it was so high. I do think that the sort of digital world that we live in explains a lot of that. I mean, I've seen online discussions about how people found out that their partner was cheating by looking at their Venmo transaction history.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there are just so many tools at our disposal now. Anything on the phone, will tell you your partner's behaviors, where they've been, who they've been talking to, where they are currently located, all of that kind of stuff. So I think just a smartphone in itself is like a hugely advantageous tool if you're trying to really get to the bottom of what your partner's doing. Those other things on the list were a bit less endorsed, but for younger singles particularly, they were engaging in these more digitally based things. So putting those AirTags on their partner's car and their partner's bag and things like that and sort of tracking them in that fashion was relatively common for people who are like Gen Z or millennial aged. So I think that this modern digital world is helping people be better detectives in that capacity.
Yeah, I would love to have seen like some longitudinal data on this because if you think about like 30, 40, 50 years ago, if somebody left the house, it was a lot harder to kind of create a trail or piece together like where they went and what they did, versus today, like if you just saw in their Google Maps, like what were the destinations that they looked at recently, or in their Uber app, like where did the Uber take them, or in the GPS system in their car, like what were the recent destinations that they added there. Like there's all kinds of things that can reveal where we've been and that kind of track our history and that create all of these digital footprints. And so, yeah, it's just a lot harder to cover up infidelity than it was in the past. So I suspect that that's probably why so many people are finding their suspicions confirmed. But it does seem, where there's smoke, there's often fire when it comes to this issue of infidelity.
I was just listening to another podcast and they were talking about how they've changed from a smartphone to a flip phone to, break themselves from looking at social media and their email and all that stuff. And I did have this moment where I thought, oh, this person is like the perfect cheater because they can't be tracked.
Right.
I don't know anything about their relationships, but yeah, I mean, if you're walking around with a smartphone, it's gathering so much information on you that another person could use to confirm or dispel their suspicions.
Yeah. And I'm sure that a lot of big tech companies have a pretty good idea about who amongst us is cheating and what we're doing because they know where we are at all the time. Anyway, in our study and in the research on sex and relationships more broadly, we see that technology is one of these things that can both deepen connection between partners, but it can also create these new pathways for betrayal, as we've been talking about. And, so technology can bring us together or it can push us apart. So as somebody who really studies a lot at the intersection of sex and technology, do you have any tips or advice for couples on how to navigate this dual nature of digital intimacy? Like, how do we maximize the positives and minimize the negatives?
Ooh, interesting question. And that reminds me, one thing that we looked at also in terms of behaviors that could be infidelity were following attractive people on social media and sending them direct messages, which I've seen not so much in the research literature, but in sort of social media land and media stories. That seems to be pretty problematic for a lot of people now, like seeing what their partner likes on social media, seeing that their partner is following these like attractive influencers and models and OnlyFans creators and things like that is really causing a lot of trouble. So, yeah, I do study a lot of technological influence on romantic and sexual relationships. And I will say there are some companies out there who have created apps that are really working to strengthen relationships between couples. And as amazing as those are, like Melba and others, I do think the majority of internet activity has a potential to create problems. So I think a lot of social media in particular can be pretty problematic for couples, especially couples who are maybe navigating jealousy issues already or insecurities or trust issues or what have you. Social media in a lot of studies seems to be really driving a lot of conflict and a lot of sort of negative thought patterns for couples. So if I would make a recommendation, it would be to try and figure out how to limit your own personal social media use and work with your partner to do the same. It's also just good for your own personal mental health. So that's a positive outcome of that as well. Beyond social media, though, I think a lot of the things that we do online, if our partner sees them as problematic or if we think that they're, a sort of drain on us mentally or socially, I think we have to start having like frank conversations about them. So particularly with the rise of things like OnlyFans, which we looked at in our data in terms of cheating, those things are so new that any generation before us, like, would never have had a conversation about this, like would never have had to deal with this. And those types of websites and apps and things like that are constantly emerging around us. And so I think that we have to get comfortable and okay with having these evolving discussions around what makes us feel inadequate as partners or what makes us feel threatened or jealous or, just how different behaviors make us feel. I think we have to get okay with that and have to start having sort of regular check-ins about that, because otherwise, as we've seen in our own data, like these things are rife for struggle. They are pretty substantial sources of stress and threat for a lot of people. And I think that's only going to grow over time. I mean, we've seen the ways that people are using AI now as romantic partners or as sexual partners. That's only going to get more advanced over time. Those are still relatively new. So that's what I would suggest. Limit social media as much as possible, or at least talk about what the problem is and get very, very comfortable with having open conversations with your partner.
Yeah, I think that's all great advice. And something else I would add to the mix would be, if you suspect your partner of cheating, first step back and ask yourself the question of, where is this feeling coming from? And is it that my partner actually did something that aroused suspicions? Or is it because I'm just feeling really insecure right now? Or maybe we haven't had sex in a little while or something else, and you just need some comfort and reassurance, because sometimes people sort of incorrectly attribute the source of that anxiety that they're feeling to something that their partner did, when actually it's kind of this internal thing that's going on where there's just some anxiety or insecurity that just kind of needs to be addressed. And, I think that's important before you go like detective mode and start like snooping through your partners, because then that can turn into this pattern of behavior where, every time you feel anxious, you start spying on your partner, and then that can lead to these trust violations, and then that can lead to conflict and turmoil in the relationship, and just an unhealthy pattern where you're just kind of always suspecting your partner of infidelity. So yeah, there's a lot that can be done here, but we also need to learn as part of this to kind of manage our own anxieties when they bubble up.
Totally. Yeah, it's completely okay to need validation, but there doesn't need to be someone blamed in the process.
Good point. So thank you so much for this amazing conversation, Amanda. It was a pleasure to have you here. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work, and also to stay up to date with the Kinsey Institute?
Yes. So the Kinsey Institute has a website, kinseyinstitute.org, where you can read about my research. You can also read about Justin's research there, keep apprised of any events or new articles or what have you. We're also at Kinsey Institute on all social media. And I do have a website that I try to keep pretty well updated, which is just amandagesselman.com.
Well, I'll be sure to include links to all of that in the show notes. Thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller, and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.